Phoenix Lights, March 13, 1997, Arizona. The desert has always been a place of mysteries. Beneath the vast sky of Arizona, people grow accustomed to the silence of wide horizons, the glitter of countless stars, and the occasional streak of a meteor burning across the heavens. March 13, 1997, began as any other cool spring evening. The residents of Phoenix, Prescott, and small towns scattered across the state went about their routines, unaware that the night would soon etch itself into history as one of the most widely witnessed and hotly debated unexplained aerial events in the modern era. The first reports came not from Arizona but from neighboring Nevada. At around 6:55 p.m., a man in Henderson stepped outside his house to smoke a cigarette. He glanced upward and saw a formation of bright lights moving silently against the darkening sky. To him, they looked like 5 distinct orbs, glowing white and arranged in a V-shape, with the point leading southward. They were not blinking like normal aircraft lights, and they moved as if connected by something unseen, maintaining their position without wavering. It was like a carpenter's square, just floating there, he would later recall in interviews. He phoned his family to step outside, and they too watched the strange procession glide into the distance. Minutes later, across the state line in Arizona, people in Prescott Valley began to look up. Amateur stargazers, used to the clear visibility of the desert, were among the first to notice. What caught their attention wasn't only the brightness of the lights but the way the stars behind them seemed to vanish. A retired police officer described the moment years later. It was as if a huge object was blotting out the sky. You couldn't see stars where it passed overhead, just this black void with the lights on its edge. For some, the lights appeared to be attached to a solid, massive craft. Others weren't sure, but they agreed on one detail: it was silent. No engine hum, no rotor thump, no jet roar. Just silence. Families out walking their dogs, couples stepping outside after dinner, children playing in yards all across Prescott and the surrounding communities. People paused and craned their necks. The formation was huge, moving slowly but steadily, and always maintaining its perfect V pattern. Witnesses estimated it stretched as long as several football fields across, dwarfing any known aircraft. One mother, holding her young son's hand, whispered, "Do you see that? Do you see what I see?" The boy would nod, wide-eyed, years later recalling the awe and fear mingled in his chest. By the time the lights reached Phoenix, the phenomenon had grown beyond the scattered observations of a few. Thousands of residents across the metropolitan area bore witness to what became known as the Phoenix Lights. The city, with its population of over 1 million, offered countless vantage points, backyards, highways, hilltops, and parks. At approximately 8:30 p.m., calls began flooding into local television stations, radio shows, and police hotlines. People reported a gigantic, triangular, or boomerang-shaped formation of lights moving directly over their neighborhoods. Some described it as flying so low they could make out the underbelly of a craft, smooth, dark, and immense. Others insisted they only saw the lights themselves, suspended in an uncanny symmetry. But nearly all agreed on two remarkable aspects: the silence, and the sheer size. One man driving along Interstate 10 slowed his car, joining others who had pulled onto the shoulder to stare upward. It wasn't 5 separate planes, he insisted later. It was one thing. One solid thing that just kept going and going until it passed over us. A woman living in Scottsdale remembered stepping out onto her balcony and nearly dropping the glass of water she carried. The formation was so large it stretched across her entire field of vision. "It was like watching a city float above you," she said. Another witness, a pilot, would later state that no conventional aircraft he knew of could fly that slowly, in that formation, without sound. The mystery deepened. As the lights advanced across Phoenix, entire neighborhoods experienced the phenomenon together. Strangers stood side by side, pointing at the sky in disbelief. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders. People who had no particular interest in UFOs or the paranormal found themselves trying to process what they were seeing. Some shouted to one another, "Are you seeing this too?" The answer was always yes. By around 10 p.m., the spectacle seemed to take on a second phase. South of Phoenix, near the Estrella Mountains, a separate set of lights appeared, this time stationary, hanging in the sky like glowing orbs arranged in a line. They remained visible for hours, slowly fading and reappearing as though pulsing. Unlike the moving V-shaped formation earlier, these lights did not drift across the horizon but stayed suspended, mesmerizing those who watched. Residents grabbed camcorders and began recording, and many of the famous video clips that would later circulate worldwide came from this portion of the night. Among those who witnessed both events was then Governor Fife Symington. At the time, he publicly dismissed the sightings, even staging a press conference where an aide jokingly appeared in an alien costume to downplay the panic. But years later, long out of office, Symington admitted that he too had seen the enormous craft and that it had left him speechless. It was otherworldly, he confessed in a 2007 interview. His reversal only fueled public belief that something extraordinary had passed over Arizona that night. The U.S. Air Force eventually offered an explanation: the stationary lights were flares dropped during a training exercise at the Barry Goldwater Range. They insisted the earlier moving lights were simply aircraft flying in formation. But many eyewitnesses rejected this explanation outright. "I was in the Air Force. I know what flares look like," one veteran said. "These weren't flares. And what flew over my house wasn't any plane I've ever seen." The controversy grew as reporters interviewed witnesses from all walks of life: teachers, doctors, police officers, pilots, and children whose stories remained consistent. A massive, silent, V-shaped object had crossed the Arizona skies on March 13, 1997, witnessed by tens of thousands of people. The official explanations, for many, only deepened the mystery. Skepticism was natural. Arizona, after all, was home to multiple military installations, and the skies were often busy with training flights. But the scale of the reports that poured in that night was unlike anything local authorities had dealt with before. The sheer number of phone calls to news stations, police departments, and even Luke Air Force Base suggested something bigger than a handful of mistaken observations. Thousands of voices, none connected to one another, described nearly the same thing: a vast formation of lights, either attached to or part of a colossal craft, moving silently over the state. For those who stood directly beneath the lights, the experience was visceral. A family in Chandler recalled sitting outside for a barbecue when the lights came into view. The father set down his spatula mid-sentence, watching in disbelief as the triangular formation approached. The mother pulled her daughter close, whispering that she couldn't hear a single sound. "Airplanes make noise," the daughter said matter-of-factly. "Why aren't these making noise?" The family would later recall that the object seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as if observing, before continuing steadily south. Truck drivers along the highways surrounding Phoenix provided further testimony. Many of them were experienced observers of the sky, accustomed to spotting aircraft on their long hauls. On that night, several pulled their rigs to the shoulder, joined by motorists who had done the same. In impromptu gatherings by the roadside, strangers stood side by side in the glow of headlights, all staring at the same impossible display above. One trucker radioed to others, his voice carrying across the CB channels, "Anyone else seeing this? It's not just me, right?" Replies crackled back affirmatives from miles apart, confirming that this wasn't some local trick of perspective but something grander, traversing the entire region. In Prescott, a group of amateur astronomers who had set up telescopes earlier in the evening found themselves torn between their instruments and their naked eyes. The telescopes, designed for pinpointing celestial objects, were too narrow in view to capture the enormity of what passed overhead. One man lowered his scope entirely, muttering, "You don't need magnification for this. It's taking up the whole sky." The group, usually disciplined and analytical in their observations, found themselves silenced, reduced to whispers as the lights drifted overhead. Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport also entered the picture. Several air traffic controllers, monitoring their radar, reported no unusual returns corresponding to the lights visible from the tower windows. Pilots flying into the city reported seeing the formation but confirmed that their instruments picked up nothing anomalous. This disconnect between what was plainly visible to the naked eye and what was absent on radar deepened the mystery. Aircraft of the size implied by witnesses should have been impossible to miss, yet the screens remained stubbornly blank. As the night wore on, the second phase of the event drew more attention. South of the city, along the horizon near the Estrella Mountains, the stationary orbs burned steadily. For many residents, these were the lights they managed to capture on camcorder. The footage, grainy and shaky by modern standards, nonetheless showed distinct glowing points in the night sky, hovering in formation. To the observers on the ground, they seemed otherworldly in their persistence and symmetry. Among those who filmed the event was a Phoenix resident named Dr. Lynn Kaitii, who would later become one of the most prominent voices advocating for serious investigation. She had already documented similar anomalous lights in the months leading up to March 13, and on that night, she managed to record what became some of the most widely circulated evidence. Her testimony, combined with her footage, gave weight to the argument that something unusual had indeed occurred. Meanwhile, local newsrooms buzzed with chaos. Phone lines lit up with reports, overwhelming staff. Anchors interrupted broadcasts to acknowledge the flood of sightings, though they were careful not to label the lights as extraterrestrial. The word UFO was used in its strictest sense, an unidentified flying object, not necessarily alien in origin. Still, the undertone of wonder, fear, and speculation hung in the air. Residents wanted answers, and the media found itself caught between incredulity and responsibility. In the following days, official responses trickled in. The U.S. Air Force announced that the stationary lights had been flares dropped during a training exercise at the Berry Goldwater Range. The explanation, while technically plausible for the later portion of the sightings, failed to address the earlier V-shaped formation that moved across the state. For many witnesses, it felt like an evasion. "I know what flares look like," a pilot told reporters. "They don't fly in a perfect formation over hundreds of miles." Governor Fife Symington's handling of the situation initially did little to calm frustrations. At a press conference, he attempted humor, bringing out an aide dressed in a rubber alien costume. The stunt drew laughter from some, but for many witnesses who had been profoundly shaken by what they saw, it felt dismissive, even insulting. Years later, Symington admitted regret. He confessed that he had seen the enormous craft himself, describing it as otherworldly and unlike anything he had ever encountered. His later honesty became one of the most cited elements of the Phoenix Lights story, reinforcing the sense that this was no simple misidentification. The incident did not fade quickly. Over the weeks that followed, community meetings sprang up across Arizona. People gathered in church halls, libraries, and town centers to share their experiences. For some, the event was deeply personal, sparking nightmares or existential questions. For others, it became a point of pride, a strange badge of collective experience. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now bonded over their shared sighting. Eyewitnesses ranged across demographics: teachers, doctors, children, police officers, retirees, lending the event a rare sense of democratic inclusivity. Skeptics continued to press their case. Astronomers and aviation experts pointed out that flares can appear to hover, especially when suspended by parachutes, and that aircraft in formation can create the illusion of a single large object when viewed from certain angles. They emphasized that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and grainy video paired with anecdotal testimony did not meet that standard. Yet even some skeptics conceded the scale of the event was unusual. Rarely had so many people, in such a concentrated area, reported essentially the same thing. The Phoenix Lights became a cultural touchstone, entering the lexicon of modern UFO lore alongside Roswell and Rendlesham. Documentaries explored the event, radio shows debated its meaning, and books dissected every angle. The mystery was compounded by the lack of clear photographic evidence of the earlier moving formation. While thousands had seen it, few managed to capture it on camera, leaving researchers reliant on testimony. The later stationary lights were well documented, but those were the ones most easily dismissed by the flare explanation. The heart of the event, the massive, silent, V-shaped object, remained frustratingly elusive in physical evidence. As years passed, the Phoenix Lights continued to inspire inquiry. Investigators interviewed new witnesses who had remained silent initially out of fear of ridicule. Some came forward with strikingly similar descriptions: the sensation of being dwarfed by something vast, the eerie silence, the way the stars disappeared as the formation passed overhead. These consistent details, repeated across dozens of independent accounts, formed a body of testimony difficult to ignore. What lingered most for many was not fear but awe. Unlike encounters that inspire panic, the Phoenix Lights left many witnesses with a sense of wonder, as though they had glimpsed something extraordinary that defied conventional explanation. Parents described their children's wide-eyed amazement, not terror. Adults recalled standing frozen in reverence rather than dread. The night became a shared memory, a story passed down through families, neighbors, and communities. In academic and scientific circles, the Phoenix Lights remain a case study in mass sightings. Psychologists analyze the event in terms of perception, group psychology, and the reliability of eyewitness accounts. Sociologists examine how the incident shaped community identity and discourse about the unknown. For aviation and military analysts, the event poses questions about the limitations of radar, the potential for misidentification, and the boundaries of official communication with the public. Even today, standing in the Arizona desert under a canopy of stars, locals recall that night with a mix of pride and mystery. Some hope for a definitive explanation that will satisfy both skeptics and believers. Others prefer the uncertainty, finding in it a reminder that the universe still holds secrets beyond our grasp. The Phoenix Lights endure not only as a historical event but as a symbol of humanity's unending curiosity about the skies above.